Welcome to EdTalks, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of learning and development, brought to you by Eli, powered by Panopto. I'm Ina Horvath, a learning strategist, and in today's episode, we are diving into the key strategies for making learning and development impactful and measurable. We'll explore how organizations decide between internal and external solutions, the best ways to demonstrate the value of L&D to stakeholders, and how metrics, return on engagement and return on investment, can shape decisions and drive success. Today, I'm joined by Andy Candler, a pioneer in interactive digital learning with nearly 40 years of experience in designing and delivering innovative learning programs for global leaders like Google, Intel, Apple, and Microsoft. Whether you are an L&D professional or simply curious about how to make learning initiative more effective, this episode is packed with insights and practical advice, so let's jump in. Hi, Andy. It's wonderful to see you here today.
Hi, Ina. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to have this opportunity to talk about the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually we start our episodes from rapid fire questions. So if you are ready, let's dive straight into that. Okay,
Absolutely, yeah.
lovely. So what book or resource can you recommend on L&D or education topic?
So that's a really good question. So I'm dyslexic, and I have some ADHD. So books are not my go-to place for learning and for knowledge. Um, I try so many times. I've got a pile of books to read, but they just don't work for me. So for me, where I get my knowledge and information on learning topics is through networking with groups, either on LinkedIn. There's a load of educational groups on LinkedIn. And I belong to two very important uh, L&D networks. One is the Learning Network
Mhm.
in the UK. And from that network, I get the knowledge and information about how to make stuff, how to make content, technologies, and so on. But I'm also part of a group called L&D Free Spirits, and
Mhm.
their focus is more about freelancers and independents on how to be successful and how to, it's more focused on the business side of things. So with a combination of those and a few other groups, that's where I get my knowledge from. I'd love to be able to sit down and read a book, but it's just not for me.
Next question is, who do you recommend to follow and invite to this podcast from L&D experts?
So I would highly recommend that you follow Tom McDowell. He's the chief learning geek at his own L&D company, but he's also been chair of the Learning Network for quite a while. So he's able to give you the knowledge about the Learning Network, but also he shares a lot of knowledge about how to be very good at delivering L&D.
Mhm.
And I've learned a lot from his videos and podcasts. Um, there's also somebody called Robert Wagner, who is co-founder of a group called CLO 100. Um, what I like about what CLO 100 are doing is they're trying to break the L&D department away from the HR department within a business and make it a strategic part of the business strategy. Invariably, L&D is kind of lumped into HR and thought of as being a cost center, but I'm a big believer that L&D and HR are two very separate things. So I love what Robert Wagner's doing.
Absolutely. Next one is, could you share a memorable failure or a setback in your L&D journey and how did you overcome it?
Failure is such a strong word. I always think a failure is 100% an opportunity to learn. And I love learning. I try and learn something new every day. Um, I guess the biggest setbacks I've ever had is working with clients where the relationship has been rather one-sided. It hasn't been collaborative. Um, I think with a collaborative relationship, there's openness, there's honesty, and I think when you have that open and honest relationship with your client or even a supplier, you're guaranteed to deliver success. When you're just a kind of a client-supplier relationship, if something goes wrong, there's always this feeling of finger pointing and apportioning blame. Whereas if you're collaborative and something goes wrong, you kind of just roll your sleeves up and try and solve it together. And how I try and overcome this is when I first engage with a client, the first thing I ask them is, what's expected of me? What do you expect me to do in this relationship? And likewise, I turn it around and say, well, this is what I expect of you in this relationship. And we talk about the roles and responsibilities of a project. You might have a certain role within a business, but I'm focusing on the role within this project. Are you the person that's going to sign off the budget? Are you the person that's signing off the content? Are you the person that's going to gather all the information together? So when you know those roles and responsibilities for everyone that's involved with a project, it really builds a team. And building that team is where you have that collaboration. And also at the end of a project, having a good, honest lessons learned that says, this is what was a success, this is what wasn't a success, and discussing it openly with that collaborative client and really getting to the crux of what went wrong or what was really good so that you can carry that on into future projects with them or with other clients.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the honest answer. So truth be told, it's like I think 25th episode, and I have never met a guest who said, "Oh, we didn't have any failures," and I'm not a fan of failures. That's a really healthy attitude, I think. And
If
yeah,
if someone tells you they haven't had a failure, then they're not telling the truth.
ab- absolutely. So, what question must be asked on a job interview for L&D specialist or instructional designer, learning consultant? So, person involved into learning, what would you ask them to show their perspective?
That's a really good question. So I've never actually interviewed anyone for a specific L&D role within my business. But I guess the question that I always looked upon with people that I work with is I would ask them where they go to learn new things. Where do you go to get the knowledge that you need? How do you self-serve your learning needs? Because I think by asking someone where they go to learn, number one, it's an interesting resource for me to learn about. So maybe it's something I don't know. But also it gives you an understanding of what kind of learner they are. And when you understand what kind of learner they are, that's where you can build a much
Yeah.
better relationship with them.
Yeah.
Um, re- and as you say, that's whether they're an employee of yours or they're a client or a supplier or you're collaborating together on a project. It's always good to know how people like to learn.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. That's a good one. So, how do you practice what you preach?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, lastly, if you had to give one piece of advice for someone who is just starting their career in L&D, what would that be?
That's a great question. I was discussing this morning, and um, I'm an independent freelancer, contractor, whatever you want to call it, and I have a team of people, specialists that I work with, but I never think that I'm on my own. And I think anyone that's joining the industry or has been many years in the industry like I have, connecting and talking to people is so important. Inside the industry and outside the industry. Um, what I found is in the last 4 years, conversations with even people you would consider competitors are always really valuable. Be open in your conversations. Don't just focus on what am I going to get out of the relationship because that's never a good relationship. But sharing ideas, sharing information about the industry, I think is so important. Um, and as I say, even if you speak to someone and you think, oh, they might be a competitor to me, I always think it's a worthwhile conversation because you might learn something new and you might connect with somebody who in the future you can help each other on a project. So yeah, don't do it alone. Talk to other people.
Yes, yes. And I mean, it's in our core, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So speaking of, one of the main points of our conversation today is internal versus external L&D. This is very simplified, and we've been just talking right before we hit the record button that it's super easy to say that what's better, internal or external. And of course, it would be totally wrong to start the conversation and have a conversation in this aspect in general. But what I'm curious about to find out your opinion is that there are several organizations who prefer only outsource L&D. There are some who prefer only internal. So are there any criterias when organizations make this choice? So we will go only with outsource or only with internal. In your experience, which organization have which demand for which solution? Let's call it like that.
Yeah, so it really depends on the circumstance, obviously. I have worked in agency delivering learning for clients. Um, those clients sometimes have their own internal teams, or the clients don't have any capability at all. Um, I L&D can be quite a roller coaster, and resourcing needs to be quite flexible. What I found when you've got an internal team of staff, it's difficult to plan well
Mhm,
um, for future work because if you have a finite team of people, I found when I work with an external team, I can flex that team up and down as and when I need them.
mhm,
So that's one of the differences between having an internal and external team. Another thing is industry influence is really important, I feel. So if you've got an internal team, perhaps they're overworked or they have a lot of deadlines, they can be focused too much on the delivery of what they need to do, going through the tasks, delivering the content, ticking the boxes. And sometimes they don't have the time to put their head up for fresh air and think about um, the external world to what they're doing. So with an external supplier, whether that's me as an agency or whether it's the people that I work with to deliver, we're influenced by many different clients who are in different industries. My team could be delivering e-learning for a company that makes sandwiches 1 minute to a company that makes servers the next minute. And just having that internal um, kind of opportunity to work with lots and lots of different ways with lots of different clients really does make that the knowledge and the experience of that team quite broader. Um, However, with external suppliers, um, when you're a business, reputation is key. And if you have external suppliers, you've got to then decide, is it my product that I'm actually delivering and selling here, or is it someone else's product? Um, and you also have to make sure that you trust that supplier. Will they have the same focus as you have in your business? Do they have the same goals? Do they really understand your clients well?
mhm.
Um, so there's kind of pros and cons for both.
Yeah.
Um, when I'm working with clients who have an internal team, but I'm using my external suppliers, I always make sure that there's a gel, there's a fit there. I don't want anyone to feel that there's a new team coming in and they're going to be doing things differently. So I make sure that any political issues or any risk issues with using an external and an internal team together, I try and remove those as early as possible and make sure, again, going back to, as I said earlier, collaboration,
Mhm.
making sure that the external team know what the internal team expect of them and making sure the internal team don't feel very threatened.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
that's really important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So makes sense 100%. And just an off-topic question a little bit. I've been thinking that while I was listening to you, that if I was a starter in L&D or instructional designer, probably I would want to start my career with working for external L&D because you get the chance to meet a bit more businesses and see diverse angles of the problems and the solutions. What do you think?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, some people might decide I want to work for X company
Yeah.
and I want to work in X industry, and
Mhm.
that's what I want to focus on. Then I would say you should be looking for that internal role if possible.
Mhm.
If you do want that diversity, then I would suggest you either look to an agency or look to a team that deliver e-learning to multiple clients um, and try and join them. And then, yeah, you will get that broad range. And it might be from that broad range, after a couple of years, you decide, well, actually, pharmaceuticals is where I want to be. And that's where you could maybe switch to being more industry focused, or you could decide that video learning is something that I really like. So you might go into that direction.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends. When I left school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I went for the broad spectrum. And that's when I found out A, the things that I'm good at, but also B, the things that I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got a mesh of those two things, I think you're in your sweet spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Sounds logical. So, just also coming back to the part of your point where you mentioned the issues of internal L&D. And I think while you were saying that, sometimes they're overwhelmed with their tasks and they're focused so much on delivering the content and, ticking the boxes and so on, that makes me wonder. And I remember myself, there was a point in my career when I was representative of internal L&D, and I would start doubting myself that am I doing the right thing? Is the industry going in the same direction as I am going? Because it's been a while since I connected. And just like you mentioned also in the beginning, that, this point of connecting to someone who might be even your competitor, that's not always the easiest thing to do. So, how do internal L&D teams ensure that they stay up to date, the latest trends and practices in the field?
Well, if you're working with a good company, they will give you the time to have that breathing space. They'll give you the time to step away from paid work, if you like, and go off and research, um, look at other people's learning, for example, sign up for different training programs to see what other people are doing. Um, I would like to think that most businesses nowadays, if they do have an internal team, they would encourage people to do that. When I had an agency, I encouraged my creative team to go off um, to go around the shops because we worked a lot in retail. Go and look at other shops, go and look what's happening in retail, or go to the library, or go and see a movie. All of these things give you different aspects, different influences. And I would, as I say, I would hope that you work for a company that does that and doesn't work you like a machine.
Yeah.
And if you do, then maybe you're working for the wrong company.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, switching the topic just a little bit, but we are still talking about the same major aspects of L&D. If you go to any kind of webinar on L&D challenges or L&D priorities for 2025, for 2024, 2023, so the last 5 years, I'm sure one of the topics would be metrics, right? So showing the value. And I think this is something that we talk about a lot and often, but however, it's still an open issue. And in many companies, they say we don't have enough of data, or we can't analyze data, or we can't show real value, right? Like it's also a topic, another topic showing the real value. And that's what we will focus a bit more in our conversation. But for now, let's start from the basics that starts with communication, of course, with stakeholders. So, how do you effectively demonstrate the value of L&D initiatives for both external and internal? With external, it's a bit more understandable. You won't be hired unless, again, right, unless you show the real value. But is it always a number? How do you demonstrate the impact of your initiatives?
So I would turn the question around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so if I had someone in leadership or a stakeholder that came to me and said, how are you going to demonstrate how well this training has been delivered? I would turn it around and I would say, well, what are your objectives? What is the business objective of what we're about to do? Um, what is the expectation at the end? Um, um, I generally at the start of a project I hold a discovery workshop. And one of the first questions I ask after I've asked the roles and responsibilities and we've decided who's who, I ask them, what will success look like for this training program? Then I will go through the process of understanding what that client needs, and we discuss all the intricacies of the learning program. And that could be an hour, 2 hour session. And then my last question I ask is, I ask the question again. Now that we understand the program better, how are we going to measure success of this project? And invariably, the stakeholders or the leadership team will have changed by going through the process of learning. And what they're doing is they're learning how we're going to deliver our learning. So
Mhm.
they've gone through a learning process. Um, and then once we've done that, we've set some clear objectives, and we've identified a way that we can measure it. So we should, at the end of a program delivery, be able to say, did we do this? Yes, we did. How can we prove that? We use this methodology. So that's how I normally manage that kind of thing.
Yes, yes. I really truly feel inspired by this kind of approach because I think in most of the companies, when you start to have this initial stages of conversation about your learning journey, learning program, most of the times you are expected to give an answer, and that should be either ROI, which we will discuss a bit later, or NPS. We also in L&D we talk a lot about learner-centered approach, right? So we also try to build products that learners not just will remember, but feel engaged with, and the learning retention comes from their engagement. So what role does it play when we are trying to keep in mind, these business outcomes, learning objectives that are aligned with organizational objectives? So speaking of learners' engagement, how do we keep in mind, how do we maintain the connection between engagement and business objectives? Is there one?
Well, I have a three-stage approach to delivering, and it's learner first.
Mhm.
So a client may come to me and say, I want to achieve this. I want to achieve X. And I say, that's great. Let's talk about your learners first.
Mhm.
So I try to discover who they are, what kind of person they are, whether they've had any experience in learning before and whether it's been successful or not. How do they like to learn? Where are they going to learn? When are they going to learn? So really get to an understanding of the learner. Then I step back to the client and say, right, now we know the audience. Let's discover these real objectives that you want to achieve. And that's where we go through understanding what that business wants to do and what they want, what the outcome they want out of the learning program. And then my third step, and it's always the last thing, is what technologies, what applications are we going to use to deliver the learning? Technology should always be the last thing you discuss. Um, Invariably, there's lots of e-learning agencies and companies out there that are selling the latest, greatest, shiny technology. But the truth is that technology should be the last thing. You need to know who's going to be learning. You need to know what do you want to achieve, and then you can talk about the best way to deliver that learning.
I also do remember once you mentioned to me return on engagement as opposed to return on investment. So could you elaborate on that? What's the difference? And it's not a very common term in L&D, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. So, yeah, so return on investment, I think we all understand that. It's all about the bottom line. How much did I spend and how much did it generate for me? And I've got clients that purely use that metric.
Mhm.
And the client can say, if I spend £1 with you, I get £10 return. That's very simple. And that's always an ideal situation to have because if you think about it, the more the client spends with you, the more money they're going to make. So that's a brilliant situation. But if you're training an internal team, or there's no way that you can strategically say, this is the bottom line, this is how it's going to affect our bottom line, then I like to talk about return on engagement or return on expectancy as well is another way of saying it. And what that is looking at the overall benefit to the business, much more of a holistic measurement of the business. Um, and that's how I envision, that's how I talk about the difference between return on investment and return on engagement.
So in situations when it's impossible to count, to give a certain number to that, what's the best way to communicate the value of learning experience?
Yeah, so sometimes there's no way to track the pennies and pounds on a learning program. It's on paper, it's an expense.
Mhm.
Um, but if you use that more holistic approach, you can see how you can maybe look at how the business has changed as a result of the learning.
Yeah.
So, um, You could look at how you've achieved your business objectives. And if your business objectives are not, let's sell more things. I had a client once and their business objective was purely ROI based. It was based on how many more things do we sell, but
Mhm.
also how reducing the number of things that were returned. Because they had a lot of situations where customers were buying something and then realizing it wasn't the right thing and returning it. So that's a very easy measurement in some ways. Um, if you think about return on engagement, you could be measuring learner feedback or the
Mhm.
reaction that you have from the learners to the training content. Um, you can measure how well the information's been conveyed to them. You can measure how much of it's been retained. So I had a client that would measure the learning they would measure your knowledge before you did the learning, then you did the learning, then they measured it afterwards. So that's hopefully is an uplift. But also 6 months later, they measured again and how much of that information had you retained. You could look at the change of the behavior of the staff. Are they becoming more professional? Are they working together much more as a team, collaboratively again? Has the performance of the business improved? It might not necessarily mean that you're making more money, but are you producing more product? Or is your name getting out there more? But return on engagement can also include financials. And if you have the ability to measure that, um, and that's where I would work with the client and say, how can we measure these things? Well, feedback's easy to measure. You simply you ask the learners how well the information is conveyed. Again, measure later to see if the knowledge has been retained. And behavior of the staff, that can certainly be measured as well within a business.
Yes, yes, but especially depending on the topic, if we are talking about customer service or sales enablement, technical enablement, these are the numbers that you can easily get actually.
Absolutely, yeah.
And lastly, so I'm still, a bit intrigued by ROE. So, is there an example that you could share when measuring ROE has led to more strategic decisions within the organization?
Hmm, that's a really good question. Sometimes clients, sometimes it's just a sense for clients. I had one client who couldn't quite put their finger on it, but business had improved. Um, Morale was better. Um, Staff retention was better. Staff happiness obviously was better, but also the performance of the business had improved as well. I can't name the business, but just they were able to produce so with return on engagement, you can still produce reports,
Mhm.
physical reports, graphs. You can still do that. So they did have some um, information that they could produce using Power BI that said, this is how well the business has improved in these areas. Um, but it was just overall, the whole business had an improvement. The business felt more professional. The team were gelling better. Um, so I would say that's a success. I also have a lot of clients that um, are a little bit reticent to share some of the information when they've had a successful program. I've got clients that come back to me 3, 4 times a year to
Mhm.
deliver training programs, but they won't quite tell me why. But they know that by working with me, it's an improvement for them, but they don't actually share the real detail. Some of it is obviously sensitive information depending on the client. Um, but yeah, I think with ROI or ROE, you should be able to do some statistical analysis
Yeah.
and you should be able to produce graphs and information.